Perfect. Well, this is going to be recorded, and we want to make sure we respect everybody's time, so we can just jump right into things. Just a quick tech check that everyone can see screens, and just want to give me a thumbs up if you can. But I'm assuming all is good there. So welcome everybody to a joint chat that we're having today across between EnergyX and BEworks. I'll tell you a bit about who we both are and what we both do. But before that, just wanted to extend a welcome, of course, and gratitude for everyone joining us today. We recognize that Zoom fatigue is a very real thing with mandatory meetings that we all have internally and externally. So it means a lot when folks join something purely out of interest. So I wanted to extend many thanks to everyone who chose to share some time with us this afternoon. So thank you. That other quick housekeeping point, if you do have any questions, feel free to just drop it in the chat. We will, I'll check it as we go on today, but for the most part, we'll visit everything afterwards, and we can have a bit of a chat there. So yeah, questions in the chat, and we'll, for the most part, chat about it afterwards. With that, we will just hop right into things then. So my name is Savatti. I'm with EnergyX, and I'm joined today by Wardah Malik from BEworks. She's the Chief Marketing Officer there. Hi, Wardah.
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Thanks for coming. When we first came up with the idea for this session, the very first organization that I wanted to reach out to was BEworks. They are the absolute experts and authority in the field of behavioral economics and behavioral science. I remember when I first met the team there in person many years ago at their Toronto office. I could just feel the intelligence in the room at a significantly higher caliber than what I had ever experienced before. And I was told that something like 95% of the employees there are, in fact, PhDs and just very smart people. Is that right?
It's very true. I have pretty big shoes to fill sharing some of the work from the team. I'm super excited to do that today. And that's absolutely right. So BEworks is the world's first management consulting firm dedicated to the application of behavioral science to real world challenges. And our team is a team of PhDs, postdocs, a bunch of psychologists that really know the ins and outs of human behavior and decision making. And we apply that to challenges across a host of different sectors, including the energy sector, but also financial services, transportation, just a whole host of different things.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be here. I always love being able to chat with people who are much smarter than I am, which is quite often, but it's always a pleasure anyways. Why don't we just hop into things and we can kick it off. So a quick overview of EnergyX, and then we'll go into a bit of a deeper overview into BEworks as well. So at EnergyX, our mission is to provide every single building around the world with a relevant and personalized energy savings plan that leads directly to energy saving actions. We are hyper-personalized on personalization, and we're focused on personalized recommendations for every person across the country. How do we personalize the scale? Well, we employ data science and artificial intelligence to enhance the data and tools you currently have, you being utilities, government organizations, efficiency orgs, to better engage customers. I will over there, and for you, Wardah.
Yeah, I'll chat a little bit more about BEworks. So as I had mentioned, we are the foremost behavioral economics firm in the world. And we really like to set it up with the idea that we're actually all in the business of behavior change. So no matter what your firm or your organization or utility or government policymakers, whatever your objective is, we're typically trying to get people to do something. And so really understanding the foundations of human behavior are critically important, because for a very long time, there's been a lot of traditional assumptions about the things that are going to motivate change. And through the study of behavioral science and psychology and human decision making, you really start to understand that some of those traditional assumptions are not actually panning out to be true. And we'll learn a little bit more about what those are in this session. But that covers what we do in a nutshell, is to bring this new science of understanding people and what is actually going to create change to the business world and unlocking it out of academia into applied action.
Perfect. Thanks. So what does that mean for today? Well, quickly, we're going to be discussing a few key things. The topic of this discussion today is empathy. Empathy is something that is often overlooked in many relationships. When it is discussed, it's usually discussed in sort of a management consulting leadership kind of role, which is incredibly important. And I think that it's essential to employ and leverage empathy in everything that we do, not just for business purposes, but for humanity's sake, because we're all people and we're all trying to get along here. So I think it's incredibly important. But we'll talk about that, what it is and why it's important. We're going to talk a bit about customer satisfaction pre and post COVID. I use the word post loosely, depending on where in the world you are right now, of course, and have that tied to empathy as well. We're going to talk a bit about the intersection here between behavioral science and data science, how both can be leveraged and should be leveraged simultaneously to deliver that really personalized, relevant, empathetic messaging to customers that really creates that next action. And then we're going to have a quick case study as well. That BEworks has done some really exciting work around income qualified customers and income qualified programs. So we will talk a bit about that as well. And then the goal is to leave some time for Q&A at the end. So I will try and be really vigilant on time throughout, so we get to some of those questions. But again, if you have questions, feel free to shoot them out as we go through here. So a quick note on customer satisfaction that I'll mention just at this stage here. So I'm not sure how many folks here are aware on the call, but customer satisfaction in the past year has been the highest it's been in an incredibly long time. And overall, electric utility and gas utility as well, but mainly electric utility, residential customer satisfaction for the industry as a whole, for the utility industry as a whole, has been incredibly high, especially for customers that are aware of utility payment deferment and other sort of good deeds that are being offered by the utility during the pandemic. When we talk about empathy, we talk about somebody having an understanding of another person's point of view, where they're coming from, and reacting according to that other person's position. So knowing that many folks were dealing with significant hardships, with layoffs, health issues, and a whole slew of other challenges that the pandemic brought, the fact that the utilities would implement, was halting power shutoffs, was halting collections, was setting up significant deferred payment plans, were all things that really said to customers that my utility cares about me as a human being. I think the experience that customers had with investor-owned utilities versus municipal utilities versus co-ops may have been pretty similar throughout the pandemic itself, for that reason, because utilities cared and they showed their customers that they cared, and they made sure that their customers knew that we have these programs to help support you. We're stopping collections. We're doing all these different things. And like I said, CSAT scores was incredibly high. There's a JD Power report that you can read on that, comparing some the top 12 IOUs in the country and how they were rated and why they were rated at that level. But the scores and those satisfaction scores are clear evidence that kindness, or at the very least the perception of kindness, and being a good corporate citizen during difficult times is worth every ounce of effort and every ounce of communication that goes with it. The challenge is, and the question now is, okay, well, now that we're entering this post-COVID reality, how do we ensure that we retain the same levels of customer satisfaction? And I'm not saying the same levels of customer satisfaction scores. I'm saying, how do we ensure that we can take the lessons learned that we've developed throughout the past year and a half, and really apply those to everything moving forward, to our marketing messaging, to our program engagement, to our customer enrollment, to so many different things that we're doing. And I want to have this be the thread of our conversation today. And we'll come back to it as we continue discussing here. But with that, I think it's important to now dive a bit deeper into the concept of behavioral economics. And I'll let Wardah take that away and give us the lowdown here. So with that, I will hand it over to you.
So to put a definition up, behavioral economics is a scientific study of human behavior, and it offers us powerful new ways to create and measure change. So there's just a little bit to unpack here, a few things to understand about BE. It's almost like a triangle with three different, or a three-legged stool, we call it sometimes, where behavioral economics encompasses not just understanding human behavior through science, but also when we talk about powerful new ways to create change. So that is things like nudges, which might be familiar to some people who've heard of BE. It's this idea that, information and incentives are often not enough. And so when you start to understand human biases, you design these nudges in the environment that don't restrict people's sense of agency, or they're not super controlling, but they essentially nudge them gently towards an option that is better for them. And then the last piece of the three-legged stool of BE is measuring change. And we'll talk a lot about really being able to demonstrate impact. And if anybody remembers science class back in the day in the scientific method, part of that is experimentation. And experimentation and measuring change is core to BE as well, because you want to know whether the hypotheses that you're generating about human behavior are actually translating to measurable impact. And a lot of marketing campaigns, it's traditionally very difficult to always measure impact, but this is really where our conversation today, Aaron, bringing behavioral science and data science together, is that you are now, in this new world where we have a lot of information, able to more accurately measure change and develop better campaigns for your target population as a result. So next slide, starting off with a really simple example that I love. I'm sure all of us would have noticed that over the past few years, we're seeing more and more of these calorie counts on our menu. And the general idea here is that if you simply give people information about which foods are healthier versus which foods are not as healthy on a particular menu, it's going to cause people to pick healthier food options. Intuitively, this seems like it would be the case, but when they actually ran some large-scale studies in fast food restaurants in particular, where you have people, with food issues eating those high caloric meals, you actually find that their caloric intake doesn't change as a result of seeing these numbers on a menu. And it's because it's sort of based on this traditional assumption, again, that just giving people information is going to change their behavior. But the types of information can take so many different forms. And it's not always the most powerful thing to get them to change their behavior. So I love this example because on the surface, it seems like it would work, yet studies that have been done shows that unfortunately it doesn't for the populations that we want it to target. And third, the unfortunate thing is that if these experiments were done in advance, then it wouldn't have been rolled out so wide scale, only to find out that it's not as impactful as it could have been, or as other alternatives were they studied.
If I can take a second here and interject and tie it directly to utilities, I'm sure the thing that comes to mind for a lot of folks here is the home energy report, right? The information is good for sure, right? It's a start, but I think now more than ever, it's sort of the question is, okay, so what? Now what? What's next, right? How do I take this home energy report or home energy score in many cases, and what do I do with it next, right? How are you going to help me lower it? Is this good? Is this even bad? Like, is 600 calories okay for lunch? There's no context. So I love this, and I love seeing really great studies in other industries, whether it's food, it's healthcare, it's entertainment, it's banking, that is so directly tied to utilities as well. And we can do a lot of good with that and really empower folks to take some sort of an action.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Aaron. One other thing that I'll add is that the reason why information in this context doesn't work is because there's so many other forces that are actually guiding our decisions, like our previous habits, what other people are doing. In most cases, we've got sense in the room. We, create some rationale as to why we're going to make the choices that we are. And so that's really what BE understands, is all of these other forces that are far more powerful than what we would expect people's behavior to be influenced by information. And as you relate this to energy, some of our early work, even looking at kilowatts per hour, you can kind of compare it to calories. People don't actually understand kilowatt per hour, what that means in context to their bill. So you often need other types of information and nudges and cues and points of feedback that help the information.
Okay. I'll move on to the next slide to dig a bit deeper.
So if there's a bit of a pause, it's like
yeah.
Behavioral economics. BE really understands that we are boundedly rational. What this means is that we're not like computers where we have unlimited mental power. Our minds actually get fatigued pretty easily. And so many forces that we'll talk about, like stress or, worrying about your paychecks or how you're going to pay your next bills, all of these things put a really big cognitive load on us, and that impacts the decisions that we make. Number two is that we rely on a lot of heuristics and mental shortcuts. So we don't often sit there and weigh the pros and cons of every decision that we make. Instead, we rely on biases and these mental shortcuts to make snap judgments and make snap decisions. And again, this is thinking about the food example, is where we're relying on our old habits or our emotional state or the actions of other people. And the field of BE and the academics and our teams have really studied the hundreds of biases and heuristics that do exist out there that are being discovered that help us really understand these shortcuts and how to design better, knowing that these biases exist. And so that kind of ties into the third point. So we have a number of biases and mental shortcuts that we use. But through the study of this field, we're starting to see these predictably irrational patterns. And that's also the name of a really great book that was the thing that got me interested in this field in the first place almost a decade ago, by Dan Ariely. Predictably Irrational. If you guys haven't read it, I suggest you pick it up. And the fourth point is that we can actually use these biases once we understand them to nudge people towards better outcomes by changing the choice architecture. So sometimes it's not about trying to influence people's minds or perceptions, that is a part of it, but we can actually make gains and nudge people towards better outcomes by changing the choice architecture. And that is things like the food menu, for example, or the bills that they see, or just the ways that choices are presented to them. That is all the choice architecture. Any piece of information or marketing collateral or store design or whatever it may be is what is known as the choice architecture. So in sum, we believe that there really is no neutral presentation of information. It's just unconsidered. So we really have to take a close lens to how we are communicating to people. And that's really where BE plays a strong role.
That's really helpful. So let's look at that in practice. I know that BEworks has done some exciting work on a number of really exciting projects, including build redesign and low-income programs. And I'd love to dive into that a bit. So can you give us an example of some of the work that you've done and how behavioral economics has been applied?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. So some of our earliest work actually was born out of a relationship with the Ontario Energy Board, where they wanted to understand why time pricing, which I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with, was not creating the impact that they expected it to. And again, I think because the time of use model is kind of built with these fundamental assumptions that price as a lever is going to change people's behavior. And what we know from BE is that price and information is just not enough to get people to change unless the differentials are high enough that it's a meaningful price difference. But in TOU, over time, it's just a few cents, and so the savings are really difficult. So what we did is, for our work, we looked at traditional bills and we redesigned the bill, because for the energy sector and utilities, it is really the key piece of communication that your customers are looking at every single month consistently. So you really have to treat it like the important communication tool that it is. And a lot of what is on there is very heavily dictated by the OEB, so there's not much flexibility. But we were kind of given the reins to try out a bunch of new things. So we even evaluated the definitions that were on the back. We looked at whether people were influenced by their usage in dollars or in cents, because different utilities present it in different ways. We also looked at different types of feedback, whether comparing yourself to your neighbor or to your previous consumption was going to encourage people to save more or comply with time of use pricing. So we really dissected every single thing on the bill and added in new nudges as well. So the new version of the bill is available online. People can look at all of the studies, and we then worked with a few utilities in Ontario to roll out some of those top performing bill elements. From there, other work that we've done has been on energy upgrades for businesses. There's a lot of incentives that are in place for small businesses to upgrade things like refrigeration. And as we'll talk about today, so many people leave a lot of money on the table. And there's lots of reasons why. Maybe the messaging isn't capturing attention. There's something about it that's being missed. People might feel like it's a catch, or the process is just too complicated. So taking action is too complicated. And so we look at all of those along an experience, whether it's for small businesses or low-income applicants to these types of programs, to really remove any of the barriers or points of sludge in a given process that actually hinder people from getting to where we want them to get to.
So let's now apply that to income qualified programs, right? Or hard to reach segments in general. Let's walk through some of these slides and share some of your thoughts around that process.
Perfect. So this brings us to the question of, we often have so many incentives out there, but a lot of people aren't making use of them. You see this also when it comes to academic aid. This was a problem that was tackled by a BE team out there. A lot of people that are eligible for programs are not making use of them or are not aware. So that was a question that we set out to answer. I think you can skip. So in terms of what does behavioral economics help us understand about people that are low income or they have a high energy burden, so their bills make up a very high proportion of their monthly take-home income. One of the things that's been studied quite a bit is the scarcity mindset. And the scarcity mindset is sort of the idea that if you are limited by time or money, or even, there's lots of ways to demonstrate the scarcity mindset, actually. One example was something that we've all probably experienced, which is running out of gas. And it happened to me last night, where your tank is almost empty, and the decisions that you make about how far you're going to drive and the stress that you're under when you're trying to get to a gas station, or if there's traffic, that's all kind of operating in the scarcity mindset versus how you might drive when you have a full tank. And those stresses are gone. So that sense of relief that you feel when you fill up your tank versus when you're close to running on empty is one way to conceptualize the scarcity mindset, and something that many people are sort of living through on the daily, especially if money is the thing that is causing that scarcity mindset. And so by understanding that, we can see from the research that it actually shifts our attention. It shifts our attention towards very near-term things. We become very present-focused. We have a preference for smaller, sooner rewards over larger, later rewards. So you can apply that to thinking about your messaging. If you're saying, do this big thing so that you can save in the future, that's likely not going to resonate with people that are in this present focus. What am I going to do today? We see that they have taxed cognitive control. So you actually can put people in scenarios to get them thinking with the scarcity mindset, and they perform worse on cognitive tasks. So anything that's overly complicated is not going to be a task that they're going to want to take on. And so we really have to think about that in messaging as well. They're often focused on opportunity cost. If I do this, then I can't do this. And there's a heightened self-interest. So this is another important one, is that they're prioritizing personal gains over pro-social behaviors. It's more the what's in it for me versus what we might see is, do it for a better environment, or do it for Ontario, or do it for these other reasons that are more pro-social in nature, are not going to be striking the right chord with the people that are experiencing the scarcity mindset. So with that, we can highlight one of these studies here. This was a hypothetical study where they randomly assigned people into two groups, and they induced either the scarcity mindset, making them feel like they were low income, or the non-scarcity mindset, and that's the high income group. And they did this by having them think about their car breaking down, and in the low income group, they said that it was going to cost about $1,500 to fix their car. And that's highly stressful, knowing that you've got an unexpected financial burden. In the other group, they just said that your car broke down, but it's only going to cost $100 or $150 to fix it. And so you don't have that same mental burden. And they had people think about these costs as they were doing these different cognitive performance tasks. And you can see that those people that were imagining that they were going to have this $1,500 cost actually performed worse on cognitive reflection tasks that we see on the left-hand side. So it really does do something it is extremely cognitively taxing to be thinking about, where money is going to come from next. And so it's really important as we seek to understand and empathize with these Ontarians, what it is that they're going through and what their mindset is in and how they're thinking and making decisions.
And you say Ontarians, but I want to clarify that this is certainly applicable to people across the world. I'd love to draw a parallel here for a second on high cognitive tasks and requirements. I would tie it to, in many cases, applying for a rebate, for example. You may have a rebate program that is great, that provides that covers a high percentage of the cost of a measure that's to be installed. However, when there are too many barriers in place or a poor user experience to get to that point of application or eventually to that point of approval, the drop-offs are staggering. I mean, there's some interesting research that we'll talk about a bit later about, not making it too easy, but also removing unnecessary barriers that shouldn't be there. Forms, for example, is one thing, and reducing the need for duplicate entries on multiple forms that users use is like one small thing that will typically result in significantly greater uptake or completion rates on applications. I don't know how many folks on the call that may have digital forms and actually are able to track where drop-offs take place on those forms. But it's a really interesting experiment to run if you have the ability to do it. Just as a quick takeaway and take home for all of you on the call, to see where those drop-offs take place, right? And what questions are seeing the greatest decline in responses, and how you could remove some of those barriers to increase overall conversions of getting folks to apply for a specific program.
Right. So scarcity mindset, what is this going to do for beneficiaries? So they might, as we talked about, decide not to sign up for a program if it's too psychologically draining, they're feeling depleted. They will often leave free money on the table in service of more immediate goals, like just going out there to earn their paycheck. And there's also misconceptions about the programs. So if they're too tasked, to carefully review the details. There's also this stigma, having to call in for something like this, or in some cases, just not knowing that they are eligible. So these are just a subset of some of the barriers that are likely impacting this population.
Yeah. That third point there are too taxed to carefully review the details. Something that comes to mind quickly is account numbers, and when account numbers are required for participation in something, you'll see again significant drop offs there because I got to go find a bill, I got to find my account number, okay, it's too much, forget it, I'll put it off. So it's all really interesting parallels that we're drawing here. So how can all this information help us better empathize with our customers, and how can it be put to use?
I think we can jump. Oh, perfect.
Sorry. Is this where you want me?
Yes, this is great. So we'll talk about how can this be used when you understand the scarcity mindset. This is really where empathy comes in. It's about perspective taking and then being able to create action out of this newfound perspective that you have. So this work that we did, we really focused on 3 different populations. We ran an experiment. This was an online panel simulated experiment, not a field experiment. And it was run with 2,000 participants from households making 100,000 and under. And I just want to define what the samples are. So we looked at a low income group, a traditionally sort of low income group. Their cutoff was the low income. I don't know what the plus 35 stands for in there, but it was just a low income group. Then we have the high energy affordability burden, and this made up 20%, 21% of our sample. These individuals pay 3 to 5%, 3% or more of their total income towards electricity bills. So it is quite a high burden. They're not necessarily in the low income group just because of the total household income, but there is a high proportion and a high cost to their electricity bills relative to their income. And the last group that was eligible for these upgrades of the partner that we were working with is the low EAB group. So they have a low energy affordability burden, but they still qualify under the 100K household. So they do pay less than 3% of their income towards electricity bills. So we talked about the scarcity mindset, and using our knowledge of PE and the scarcity mindset, we came up with 6 different ways of framing the energy upgrade program that they were eligible for. And these individuals were shown a hypothetical email, one of 6 emails from their utility. And the messages is what we varied in this experiment. So we put the traditional savings message, which we see a lot of in the electricity sector. Things like spend less, save more. All you need to do is these simple actions and get things upgraded to reduce your electricity bill. Second message was around the environment. We also see this a lot. It's important to care about the environment and reduce your carbon footprint. The third was utilizing the power of free. And we know in a lot of other domains that free is extremely attractive. And so the hypothesis here is that, it might be more attractive to a group where they're perhaps not used to getting a lot of free things, and they are eligible now. So free captures attention, get free upgrades to help lower your electricity costs. The next one is something new. And again, kind of playing off the similar principle of free is that these groups might not be used to getting new things or spending on new things, but now here as a part of this program, you are eligible for these upgrades to get something new. The 5th option is waste aversion. So this is kind of using this classic principle of BE of loss aversion, is that we're kind of averse to creating waste. And if we are as sustainably minded and environmentally minded, then why not highlight the fact that inefficient lighting, old appliances, poor insulation all of that means that you're wasting the electricity that you're paying for. So it's both electrical, and monetary waste by not utilizing these upgrades. And the last one here is a message on comfort. So as we had talked about, those in the scarcity mindset are really sort of present focused, and they're really attuned to their current environment and conditions. So this message is about helping them enjoy a bright and cozy home all year round with these energy savings upgrades. So which one worked? And that's the question. We've got multiple hypotheses, and now we have to actually apply them. So as I had mentioned, people saw things that looked like an email with these different messages highlighted. And so they would have only seen one email. And what we see is that actually different messages resonated with different groups. And so it is really important to experiment across the board. What we find is that with the HAP eligible, that lower income group, the comfort message actually got them to see a higher perceived value of the program. So that message resonated the most. For the low energy affordability burden, so they're the ones that are paying less than 3%, the waste aversion message really resonated. And for the high energy burden individuals, the something new, you deserve something new message performed the best. So by running this experiment, we get a little bit more of an insight into what are the things that are actually going to be aligned to the goals of our customers and the things that are important to them. And we can see that in this case, different messages create different perceptions of value. So the next thing that we tested was also, we had talked about ways of increasing perceptions of ease. So we know that people that are in the midst of a scarcity mindset, really, they want things to be as simple as possible, and as it should be, to be honest. So there are different ways that utilities can create, ease. What we tested was against the current state messaging. So in their typical emails, it would say it all starts with yes, and there would be a phone number on the bottom. That was a call to action that this program was using. But we wanted to make a few other things clear. The first thing that we tested was how quick it was to connect. So your call will be answered in 30 seconds or less. How many of us hate not knowing what the wait time is going to be like, especially when we see a call center number on something? Mm-hmm. The second is really highlighting what documentation they needed, just so that they didn't get on the call and feel like they weren't prepared. The third was a text response. So let's not even have them think about waiting. We'll call you. So just text us and we'll give you a call in the next 5 minutes. We also looked at the local messaging. So do people feel better talking to somebody locally? We made the phone number more salient. So we made it larger rather than having it just fit in with the rest of the text. We talked about quick completion. The actual enrollment process, once you do get on the phone, it just takes 5 minutes. So give us a call today. And the last one was highlighting the information that was required and using words like all you need is. And so people get a sense of what to expect on the call. And so out of these, similarly run in an experimental format. If you go to the next slide, we'll just highlight the ones that actually resonated quite well. So these 3 strategies performed well across the board. We didn't see any differences across the 3 segments that we had in our test. So the local message, the quick connect, and the quick complete out of these resonated with the participants in the experiment.
Yeah, and we've found very similar results as well in the work that we've done with our online engagement tools, particularly on the quick complete side, right? There's plenty of research out there that shows the amount of time that customers spend thinking about their utility every year, and it's not a lot, right? Something like 12 minutes, I believe, is the number, and those 12 minutes are also not always the most positive experiences or thoughts either. Not for any intentional reason, but the fact of the matter is that the time when customers are thinking about their utility is either when they're paying a bill right? Which isn't a pleasant experience because you're paying for something that is not tangible, right? Or a incredibly negative experience like having your power shut off or being thrown into collections. So it's not necessarily that we're trying to get folks to think about their utility more often. Rather, we do want, when those interactions do take place, for them to be as positive as we can. And how can we flip the script? So how can we make things happen easily, right? This is incredibly true in the work we do in the small and medium business sector, where they don't have the time, nor do they want to have the time to sit down to complete an online audit, for example. That's where data science and artificial intelligence really comes in. And how can we begin telling a customer what they want and need before they even know that they want and need it? So it's really interesting from a data science perspective how we can draw on all of these behavioral science learnings and apply those directly to messaging that we've generated through the work that we've done within data science itself.
Yeah, that's really great. Aaron, how do you guys, we'll chat about this data point too, but I wanted to ask, how do you guys use data to make things easier for utility customers? Where do you think that sort of fits in?
Yeah, I think there are plenty of ways that we do that. And I think there's plenty of ways that utilities can do that as well. It's a question I was going to ask you on this. But the work that we do in helping utilities engage their customers in their efficiency programs is driven by data, right? So one of the core things that we do is online energy assessments, for example, right? Something that's been done for many, many years in different iterations, and not something that is necessarily totally new. But what we try and do is remove the burden that's historically been associated with it. So, for example, many energy assessments, you're looking at 10 to 15 questions, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes for a customer to answer it. We try and drop that down to 2 to 3 questions, for example, and increase the accuracy and the output. We've done a couple of experiments where we have no questions at all, and we generate an identified plan directly to the customer themselves. So that's all with data that we've collected from, in some cases, from a utility, but truthfully, typically it's not utility data. It's third-party available data that's out there that you can begin to put together messaging and build out this profile for a customer. What I was going to ask you around this point here is this can be a lot, right? We do a bunch of work with small municipal utilities and small co-ops, apart from work with larger IOUs, and the challenges they face are very different, right? Where you may have one utility that has 25 people running their efficiency program, you have many others who have 2, right? So now you're telling me that I've also got to get a PhD in behavioral science to understand my customers. What can be done to sort of take that first step around this specifically? I know we're going to get into sort of key takeaways at the end, but any thoughts around here on what can be done on an immediate level to start putting a lot of this into practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the key things is that we have to be comfortable challenging our own assumptions about what will work. Because when we go back to just that simple menu calorie count example, every policymaker or individual that had the right idea thinking that just giving people information is going to make a difference, unfortunately, it doesn't always pan out that way, even if it feels right. So I think we have to take a little bit more of a humbled approach to saying that we don't always have the right answer. And what we see and what I'm hoping to demonstrate here is not just, do this and it'll work. What the key message here is that experimentation is so important, and you don't have to do a very complicated 6 different conditions and, make it super complex. What we did here was an online simulated experiment with customers. So again, there's no costs. You don't actually have to change your email templates or create new builds in order to do this. But as a marketing team, when you just want to even intuitively come up with messages that you think might resonate, it's definitely worthwhile to test them against what you're doing today so that they're not backfiring. And sometimes we've seen that we might think that something is too risky. And we've heard this from a lot of clients where they say, I definitely either don't think this is going to work at all, or we would never do this. It's not aligned to our brand. And then when we say, hey, let us run it in an experiment, let's see if it works. Nobody's even going to know that this is your utility or your bank. So we remove logos from it. But we test it with a population that looks like their customer population. We find often very surprising things. And when you have the data, it's a lot easier to make the case that this is actually increasing perceptions of value. It's improving metrics on the key things that we want to improve with our customers. And it's far lower risk to do this in this sort of bubble type environment and then apply that in a small scale field experiment. Whether it's just an A/B test where you're saying randomly, I'm going to split customers. One small group is going to get what they always would have gotten, and the other group is going to get the message that actually performed quite well in what we have pre-tested with in this low-cost experiment. So that would be a thing that I think a lot of brands can start to do right away, even just using their own intuition rather than having to go to the scientific literature. Because that would be the ideal first step, is that you're really looking at the literature and you're looking at what nudges there are. But we don't, like you said, all have behavioral scientists on our team. But I think we've got some really great ideas sometimes. And those ideas ought to have a platform or a method by which they can be tested so that we can start to innovate in low risk settings.
Perfect. I saw a quick answer come in that I'd like to just address now. Do we have any information on the sample size for messaging around this and how it was determined? If not, it's fine.
So the total sample size, as I had mentioned, was 2,000. I don't have off the top of my head what it was for each of the conditions, but it's definitely going to be a couple hundred per condition. And then in terms of how it's determined, the PhDs on our team do a power calculation based on what they think the impact is going to be. And so that helps determine what our sample size is. So I apologize that I don't have a more concrete answer for that.
No, that's great. That's great. Why don't we just, bearing in mind the time, move forward to this one, which is really interesting as well.
Yeah, so this one is just a really a quick one to look at. What we see is that when we tested those interventions on the ways to make the whole process easier that we looked at in the previous slide, you see that when people perceive a process to be easier, they also have higher ratings of well-being or perceptions that the utility or the company actually cares. So you see this positive correlation here that's related to making things easier for people actually makes them feel like they're better taken care of. And I think that's a really important point to make now, is that the utility or whoever it is that you're working with is really not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And I think that the sector as a whole has historically had some trust issues. It's a very political hot topic every year around re-election time, energy bills and high cost of energy. So there's a lot of vilification there. And I think in order to continue to change customer perceptions and piggyback off of these high satisfaction scores that we have now, we can look for other ways to make our customers' lives easier. And looking at things like forms, question, enrollment processes, and how we are personalizing things is really important.
Yeah. The point on forms, I need to make a comment there as well, because I see in many cases where utilities or other industries will, we need to digitize the process. We need to revolutionize this application process. In this case, of course, applying for rebates and incentives. The challenge is what typically happens is you've just transferred paper problems into digital problems, which doesn't help anybody and doesn't help your customers, doesn't help your program managers, doesn't help the CSRs, doesn't really help anybody involved. I think it does when conversations like this are being had, and the effort here is to reduce sludge which is a term I just learned earlier today, specifically for BE. How can we make the entire process easier, as you said, right? How can we utilize data that we've already had to pre-fill forms? Something as simple as that. I know I have a really poor user experience when I'm asked the same question multiple times. And the truth of the matter is that customers now expect this, right? They have this in every other area of their lives. They have this with banking. They have this with their healthcare. They have this with their pharmacy, and they have it with so many other services. That is, sorry?
Your browser where it pre-fills. So we've all probably experienced where Google's got my information, and now all of a sudden I'm like, why isn't it pre-filling this form? It's frustrating when you're used to your information is being populated. You've done it so many times.
Yeah. And I think one question that comes up around that is trust in many cases, like trust and security, right? I think that if we look at the research and look at the trials that have been done, that actually is not a huge cause for concern for customers, right? As it is now, I have on my browser all my banking information stored, right? And I'm so glad that I have it there, and I know a lot of customers feel that way as well. So yes, I mean this slide and those points really do resonate throughout the entire program journey, right? From customer identification and understanding which customers are relevant and right for a program, all the way through to issuing a check. There needs to be that sort of easy, streamlined flow and journey for a customer to take part in.
Absolutely. And the thing to note here, it's kind of consistent across all of those groups. So it kind of works for everybody. Everybody appreciates things being easier, especially in a process. So the thing that I wanted to just talk about here really quickly, which is that the embargo on shutoffs and the fact that we're not collecting today as a utility industry is not something that is sustainable. There will come a point in time where things are going to slowly start to return back to normal in this post-COVID world. And so how do we take the lessons that we've learned now in demonstrating empathy and apply it to post-COVID when, utilities unfortunately will be shut off one day, or, unfortunately, we will have to start to collect from people. So what we have worked on during COVID is developing training for empathetic conversations using BE. And this is specifically applied to call center staff. So not only are call center employees on the receiving end of a lot of aggression, and especially now in post-pandemic world where customers are calling in upset and angry, and the high bills mean more today than I think they probably ever had. And on the other end, you have call center agents that are also fatigued, that are also in the scarcity mindset and this place of stress, as we all have been, with the impacts of COVID on our lives. And so when you've got two people and a call center agent that I think organizations have to empathize with right now, their own employees that are repeatedly getting angry call after angry call, their fuses are also quite short. And so our team that has dealt with, crisis communications, been helping on suicide lines, all of that, brings that science to helping really prepare call center employees for the nature of the calls that they're going through, but that may actually start to increase in the near future. So helping them with enhanced emotional support language, understanding customers' emotions and really empathizing with them. Because in often cases when you're collecting, you don't have to agree, but you have to be able to take their perspective. And you have to be able to use the right language to demonstrate that you understand the challenges that they're facing. We also help with de-stressing and conflict de-escalation, and then strengthening the call taker's resilience. And this is really focused on the employee side. You just had a very difficult call, and now they're probably feeling anxious about picking up the next phone conversation. So how do you actually strengthen their own internal resilience, knowing what your employees are going through in the call center specifically? So.
That's great. And I think a big part of that as well is going to be applying some proactive measures to obviously avoid that call in the first place, which can cannot be avoided altogether, ever. There will always be those calls, but how can we identify an angry customer before they're an angry customer, right? How can, the question that we're considering here is, okay, how can we let Wardah know that we know that you have a 15-year-old heating system, right? We know that it's going to be an incredibly cold winter and that you're going to have high bills in 2 months and you're going to make that angry call, right? What can we do today to reach out to you and say, hi, Wardah, we've identified that this is going to be your utility bill in 2 months. We've pre-qualified you for this program. Click this button to receive financing and enroll in it today. Even if you don't, right? At least we told you.
That would be a beautiful piece of communication, and I think it's definitely the right direction for utilities to go. Taking that proactive stance. There's nothing more frustrating. I'm sure we've all experienced it with Rogers, if we want to sort of harp on Rogers or telco. When you call them to cancel and they're like, oh, but there's a lower cost program. There's a lower cost, slot that we could have put you in, or an offer that we have. And it's like, but if you knew I wasn't using my data, why didn't you do something proactive about it? And I would have stuck around with you. And now when I'm leaving. So I think that there's definitely something to being proactive and showing that you care about your customers' well-being.
Just being mindful of time as well. Last slide here that we'll quickly talk about is sort of some key takeaways and what we had chatted about over the past hour. Number one is that relevance and personalization is key. This relevance and personalization can be achieved through data that you have and data that is available out there in the ether, third-party available data. This process can then be scaled with data science, right? How do we create the customer of one? How do we create relevant, personalized messaging for every single customer across a service territory that spurs them to take action based on our empathetic understanding of their current situation? The answer is the intersection of data science and behavioral science. Wardah, I'll let you mention the second point there, because that's...
Understanding where your own process is creating sludge. So sludge is a technical VE term, newly coined, but I think we can all imagine what it might be. It's elements within our own processes that are intentionally causing friction. So unnecessary questions that we're asking, making processes overly complex, really just trying to evaluate and be critical of what you're expecting your customers to go through as a part of their application. Reevaluating the language and the application process. So we saw some of the benefits of reframing in the experiments that we had shared. And then the third takeaway, again, will be on running small scale experiments to really understand what's going to resonate best, because we'll be surprised. We are often not right about what we think is going to work. So iterate and double down when you do get those nuggets, and continue to try and improve and pick the right messages and programs for your customers.
And that's probably the best timing I've had on a webinar to date. If there are any further questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to either of us. I want to extend my gratitude again to everyone on the call, again, for making time for us and for this, and for a very important conversation to be had and to continue to be had today. I also really like to thank you, Wardah, for making time today as well, for spending an hour with us and imparting some of the really exciting wisdom that you all have developed over the years, and sharing that with us today. So thank you for that. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, which is fine, because we're at the top of the hour anyways. We will share this link out to folks as well if you're interested in watching it again or sharing it. Wardah, any last thoughts for folks on the call?
No, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all. I'll be happy to share. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, EnergyX, and everybody else behind the scenes.
Well, with that, everyone have an excellent, safe, and healthy day. Thank you very much, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Thank you.
Bye now.